Hello everyone! Have you ever been interested in checking out gacha games like Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, and Zenless Zone Zero, but you found yourself wondering where to even start, or not wanting to waste time trying out games you don't even know if you'd like? Then this is the video for you. Today, I'm going to go over Genshin, Star Rail, and Zenless and explain the differences between the three. These games are all part of the HoYoVerse umbrella, along with a fourth game called Honkai Impact 3rd, which won't be covered here. This video will be broken into these sections that will go as follows. The first section is a general overview of each game, where I'll talk about what kind of game it is and what sort of content you can expect from it. Second will be a basic rundown of the stories and writing styles of the games. Number 3 will be a look at the casual experience, which will be a realistic look at what casual players who maybe play 2 to 4 hours infrequently can expect. Fourth will be how characters are written, a look at how deep characters go beyond their surface level characteristics. Fifth will be a similar section. It's basically going to be me talking about how likely it is that characters will reappear or have any persistence throughout the story. Sixth will be the endgame section, and this will be broken down into 2 subsections: building teams and the game modes of the endgame. Number 7 will be the gacha, where I talk about the pity systems, how kind the games are to free-to-play players, things like that. And the last section will be a too long didn't watch, where I'll give a quick answer to anybody who doesn't feel like sitting through however long this video ends up being. I'll also be giving each game a rating from 1 to 10 in each category except for the overview, and then listing those ratings at the end of the video. Now, as a little disclaimer before we get into anything, this video will probably be at least a little bit biased. Honkai Star Rail is by far my personal favorite of these 3 games. I've completed every available quest and all the permanent events, and I haven't even been playing it for that long, only since around the beginning of May this year. I started during Phase 2 of the 3.2 patch, and we're currently on Phase 1 of 3.5, so I really am new. I'm caught up with the story of Zenless, but I haven't completed a lot of the optional missions, and with Genshin, I'm still only at the beginning half of Fontaine's Archon quest. Technically, I was a day 1 player of Genshin, but I really didn't start playing it for real until this year. All that being said, I've experienced enough of each game and its content to be qualified to talk about them to this extent. Keep in mind that a lot of what I'll be talking about is subjective as well. I play all 3 games every single day, and I have a lot of free time on my hands, so my experience with these games is going to be very, very different from people who have a lot less time to spend on them. Also, I just want to reiterate, if you're only looking for a brief explanation, you don't need to sit through the whole video. I'd recommend only watching the overview, the story rundown, the casual section, and then the final answer sections at the end if you're looking for a crash course in these games. With that sorted, let's get right into it. Genshin Impact is an open-world action RPG where you build a team of 4 characters with varying weapons and elemental typings to fight enemies and explore the world. That open world tag comes with an asterisk because some parts of the world are locked behind story progression. That being said, the world of Genshin Impact is massive, and there's 5 years worth of content to play through. Honkai Star Rail is a turn-based JRPG that has a lot of visual novel blood in its veins. In this game, you also have teams of 4 characters with different elemental typings, though instead of weapons you have paths, and each path specializes in a specific type of gameplay. Characters following the path of the Hun excel in single target damage, Abundance characters are your healers, and Nihility characters are good for dot damage and debuffs. Star Rail is a very story-focused game, so if you're not someone who cares about story or likes to read, it's probably not going to be your cup of tea. Zenless Zone Zero is a roguelite RPG where all the combat takes place in instanced arenas. It's a very stylish and modern game, being the newest of the 3. Here, you build teams of 3 instead of 4. The characters once again have elemental typings along with a specialty that functions as a class. The specialties here are pretty self-evident, from attack to support to defense. I think the most confusing ones to new players would be Anomaly and Rupture. Anomaly characters basically deal high burst damage through status effect buildup, like Bleed or Frost builds in a Soulsborne game, while Rupture literally only has 1 character under that specialty, a character I do not own, so I have no experience with it, but according to the wiki, Rupture characters ignore a portion of the enemy's defense to deal higher damage. With that said, we'll move on to the story rundown section. Genshin's story is about a pair of siblings, Aether and Lumine, who travel across worlds and get isekai'd into the world of Teyvat. But something goes wrong and they're separated, so the main story is about you, playing as whichever sibling you choose in the beginning, finding your missing counterpart. At least that's what Genshin implies is the main story, but in reality, the story of Genshin is about you traveling to each of all the 7 nations of Teyvat and solving each of their national crises. I've seen some people describe the Traveler siblings as story witnesses rather than main characters, and while I'm not sure I fully agree with that, I do find it very funny how our protagonists, who do have voice actors, basically never speak. There is a lot of NPC yapping throughout the story of Genshin. I tend to find a lot more enjoyment out of Genshin's story when I think of it as a campy accidental comedy. I cannot take this game's story seriously at all, with how silly the animations look with the lines that are being said. It's very reminiscent of A Realm Reborn in Final Fantasy XIV with how comedic the animations can make serious moments feel. It's definitely a story that I think is best experienced casually. As long as you're not actively trying to poke holes in the story, you probably won't have too many issues with it. I don't want to sound too harsh on Genshin though, but while I didn't like Inazuma at all, if I'm being honest, I think the story really picked up around Sumeru, which is right after Inazuma. The unfortunate thing about that is that Sumeru takes about 20-ish hours of gameplay to reach, and that's only if you're doing literally nothing but the main story. I took things slowly, and it took me about 2 months to get to where I am in the story. Genshin's story gets a 6.5 out of 10. It's pretty good, but it's very campy and hard to take seriously. Star Rail, oh Star Rail, my beloved. I've heard people claim that Star Rail's story is the worst of these 3 games, and let me tell you, those people are clearly not playing the same game as me. Anytime I hear a take like that, I have to assume that those people either don't, won't, or can't read. Because the story of Star Rail is so well told in my opinion. The basic premise is that your government-mandated mommy sticks a dying star into your heart, and you lose all your memories of your past life. You, either Stell or Kalis, wake up to the members of the Astral Express checking out your unconscious body, and eventually get invited to join them on their interstellar, planet-hopping escapades. Each planet you visit aboard the Express is dealing with their own isolated disasters, usually of the planet-destroying variety, usually caused by these things called stellarons, which, you know, happens to be the exact thing that got put inside your chest. The stories, when stripped to their barest bones, can be pretty tropey, but the characters are incredibly endearing, and the tone is very modern and filled with pop culture and gaming culture references. People criticize it for being too silly at times. A lot of dialogue options can dip into zoomer-brain-done seriousness, but I find it really funny to play a character who's more laid back and silly, because eventually they fully embrace that personality, and other characters begin to acknowledge that your protagonist is unhinged and kind of weird. If I had to compare the tone of this game to any other game in particular, I'd have to say it can give off pretty similar vibes to Disco Elysium, which is among the highest of praise I can give to a game. Obviously, I'm not saying it is as good as Disco Elysium, just that the vibes are similar in the sense that you play a pretty silly protagonist in a serious story with companions that are constantly questioning your sanity. There's even a direct reference to Disco Elysium if you interact with a certain object in Belobog. Even though I did proclaim that this is my favorite of the 3, I do have to admit there was one planet that drove me insane with how long it took to tell its story, and that planet is Penacony. It's the 3rd place you visit on the Express, and much like how Inazuma, the 3rd place you visit in Genshin, was my least favorite, this is very much the same. Penacony wouldn't have been an issue for me if it was like 3 hours shorter. By the time I'd gotten around to the final boss, it was more of a relief to be there than an epic climactic moment, but that may be because that was at the end of playing through it for like 12 hours straight that day, and I had heard Sunday talk about the Charmony bird for like 5 times. I was done. A final note here would be that Star Rail is a very lore-heavy game. If you don't internalize the lore or do some of the side content, characters might allude to or bring up things that you've just never heard of at times. But as someone who really likes the lore of Star Rail, it's very rewarding to me when I can read about something in a side quest, only to have that information become useful for understanding something in the main story 2 planets later. A lot of major plot points at times can rely on the player knowing the significance of a name or a keyword, and if you don't read any of the unvoiced text and side content, you might end up missing out on some of the impact of big reveals. Also, even though I just talked about how I didn't like how long Penacony took, the current planet we're on, Amphorius, is shaping up to take even longer. But it's my favorite planet so far in Star Rail by a long shot, which is saying something because I do like all the other planets, even Penacony. I'm really hopeful for the future of Star Rail's story because every patch since I've started has been a banger. Okay, one last point here. I think it should be noted that I got tired of Penacony because I experienced it all in one go. And a friend pointed out that my love of Amphorius is because I'm experiencing it in chunks. I think I agree with that, because looking at it realistically, I probably would get fatigued by Amphorius after 3.4 if I experienced it all in one go. It's still peak though. For HSR's story rating, I'll be bold here and give it a 9.5 out of 10. As said by our wise and wondrous Heimerdinger, there's never a dull moment in HSR, and the lore goes deep. This rating is coming from the perspective of someone who cares about and reads the lore though, so I can't give you an unbiased score, because I have no idea how the story would feel with all that information missing. Zenless is a pretty decent story that gets better with time in my opinion. It's about a pair of siblings, Belle and Wise, that run an analog video store as a front for their illegal business of working as a proxy to guide people through these restricted, highly dangerous areas known as hollows. Being a proxy is illegal because more often than not, people are proxies for hollow raiders, who illegally mine the resources within hollows, making them more volatile. Hollows have the potential to destroy cities, and mining the resources within them makes them prone to expanding, so it's a direct threat to the lives of the people living around them. You play as whichever sibling you pick, as they act as a proxy for more noble reasons, guiding people safely through hollows to accomplish whatever tasks they need to do, usually rescuing people or finding information. At first, I thought Zenless was pretty cringe, I can't lie. The jokes in the intro missions really did not land for me, and I almost dropped the game because of it. But the visual style and the gameplay kept me playing, and I'm glad I did, because the story definitely got better. There's a lot of life to the characters, and slowly getting more information on Belle and Wise's past has been pretty interesting to me. I think the part where I really started to like the writing of ZZZ was during the Tord Inferno arc, and everything since then has been really solid. My favorite so far has been Hugo's arc, and no, it's not just because he's hot and vampire coded. For Zenless's score in this section, I think I can give it a 7 out of 10. The story beats go by much faster than in the other games, so it's easy to breeze through and binge the game if you've got a lot of free time on your hands. Alright, now we can take a look at what casual gamers or first-time gacha gamers can expect with low time investment. Okay, it's gonna sound like I'm going to be harsh on Genshin for most of this video, and I have to preface all of this by saying that it's my second favorite of these three games. I'm giving it a hard time not out of spite or hatred, but out of the knowledge that the other two games do so many things better. Keep in mind, by the way, that Genshin is 5 years old, and was Hoyo's first real game in this style, so it kind of acted as a testing ground for the format. My friend is often talking about how far Genshin has come over those 5 years with all the quality of life systems that have been added over time. With that said, Genshin is not a game that really respects your time. Pretty much anything you would want to do in Genshin will take you longer to do than it would in the other two games. Some examples are: 1. Farming for materials. There are a lot of things that you need to farm to level up your characters, and you need to travel to specific locations or defeat specific enemies in the open world to farm them. After you've farmed everything available for the day, you need to wait real-world hours or days for them to respawn, or visit a friend's world and take their resources. Plus, open world creatures have varying drop rates on their materials, so sometimes you'll kill a large amount of hilichurl archers and only walk away with a handful of arrows. 2. There is no skip button. Both Zenless and Star Rail have skip buttons for players that really would rather not sit through hours of yapping. Genshin doesn't have this feature, and it's made worse by the fact that you can't quickly click through the dialogue, because dialogue can't be skipped until the character models are finished with their animations. Number 3. The energy system. I'll mention this later in the endgame section, but Genshin has the lowest amount of energy and the slowest energy recharge rate between the three games, meaning the resource collection that will already take a long time is made arbitrarily longer because you need to wait for your energy to recharge. They also don't have an energy reserve system, meaning if you spend a long time away from Genshin, you will only come back to the 200 base energy, whereas the other games will slowly stockpile reserves up to around 2000 extra energy. Number 4. The stamina system. Stamina when you first start out is a resource that you don't have very much of, and to increase your maximum stamina, you need to collect these things called oculi. These are scattered across the open world, and sometimes in places that are easy to miss. While I personally think it's fun to go and collect these, it can definitely be a point of frustration for people with less time than me. Number 5. Early game combat. If you don't have a good team, you might legitimately struggle if you ascend your world level too quickly. This was a pitfall that I fell into, and I only pulled for Malika because I needed to replace my Diluc, who was just incapable of killing anything in under a minute. This is an easy problem to circumvent though. Just don't ascend the world level until you're certain that your team can handle it. One last major problem is that Genshin doesn't keep its events permanently, and sometimes they will put very important lore in those events. So people like me, and potentially you, who are coming into this 5 years later, are going to be missing crucial portions of information that we have no access to. They also put limited time weapons as rewards in these events, and a lot of the time those weapons are going to be at least one character's best in slot weapon. Albedo, for example, had a lot of his lore distributed through events, and his best weapon is an event weapon. So not only can you not access most of his lore, you can't unlock his full potential as a new player. All the stuff I listed before this wasn't that bad in my opinion, but this is really something I hope changes in the future. Like, even if they added the limited time weapons to the store and asked you to pay money for it, that would be better than not being able to get it at all. To keep this section from being all negativity, I'll mention some of Genshin's features that improve the efficiency of time usage. Number 1. Condensed resin is a big time saver. Resin is this game's energy system, and after getting the crafting recipe from Liyue's reputation quests, you can effectively halve the amount of time it takes you to farm domains, cutting down the times needed to battle an artifact domain from 10 to 5 to exhaust your resin. Number 2, Natlan's characters really ease the efficiency of travel, and you can get Kachina for free by temporarily breaking the timeline. She may not be the best character in terms of combat, but you can just have separate teams for combat and exploration if you need to. Number 3, Genshin gives you one limited pull for each act of the main story you complete, which adds up to like 35 free pulls or something, which is almost halfway to soft pity. And you'll be getting Prima Gems as rewards from these quests too, so it's more than likely that you'll have enough to get a few 5 stars. Number 4, Genshin's artifact system has a free slot. In Star Rail, if you have any offset pieces to your relics, your build is suffering from it. But in Genshin, if you get an insane set of rolls like double crit stat, elemental mastery, and attack percent on a healer set, you can throw that onto a DPS with no setback. Whereas in Star Rail, rolling DPS stats on a healer set is actual garbage unless you're trying some silly meme build. I can't think of anything else to mention here, so it's time to give Genshin its score. Unfortunately, I think I'll have to give Genshin a 3 out of 10 here. It's incredibly grindy, and it can take a long time to traverse the open world to collect everything you need, and they don't have an energy reserve system like the other games. Star Rail is right down the middle in this category. Its story takes a long time to get through. It took me an entire month of playing it every single day for me to catch up to the story, and it took one of my other friends 2 to 3 weeks. That being said, there is a skip button if you really can't be bothered to sit through the story, but at that point I'd argue there's not much point in playing Star Rail in the first place. For farming, Star Rail has one screen where you can access everything you need to farm, and there's an auto battle feature, so you literally don't even have to play the game in order to farm. I honestly have to wonder if there are people that exist who simultaneously skip the story and use the auto battle feature. That's a really funny concept to me. Like, at that point, the gameplay is just gambling. Like I mentioned in Genshin's section, Star Rail has an energy reserve that stacks up to 2,400 spare energy on top of the base 300. So if you're away for long enough, you'll come back to 2,700 energy to spend, which should be about enough to come back, pull for a new character, and then build that character completely. All 3 games have systems that will also give you a returning player event, where they give you a bunch of resources to ease you back into playing the game. I know for Star Rail that event occurs after 2 weeks of not playing, and I think it's the same for the other 2 games, but I'm not sure. Star Rail's score in this section can be 6.5 out of 10. While the story takes a long time to go through, there is a skip button available for parts that you don't care about, and the streamlined farming process and auto battle feature means that very casual players can have a stress-free process of building their characters and finishing their dailies in under 10 minutes. Zenless is easily the best game in terms of how long things take to do. Your dailies in Zenless can literally take under a minute, so there's really no reason not to do those. The energy limit in Zenless is between Genshin and Star Rail, sitting at 240, but it also has a reserve that fills up to 2,400, and you can fill your base energy beyond the cap to 980, meaning that you can hold 3,380 energy at one time. The story also has a very fast pace. You can pretty much go through a chapter a day if you really want to, even faster if you use the skip feature. Materials to farm are scattered across a few different menus, but you can get to those menus from the character you're trying to farm for, so it's not too bad. If your characters are properly built, it shouldn't take more than 10 minutes or so to expend all your energy for the day. While Zenless has less required materials than the other 2 games, it does require more materials than Star Rail. Its artifact system, called disk drives, also doesn't have a reroll feature, so if you get some insane piece like an elemental damage disc with double crit stats and attack percent, but the 4th stat is something like flat defense and all of your rolls end up going into that flat defense, it's not possible to reroll it and you'll eventually want to replace it. As for the score of this section, I think Zenless can get a 7.5 out of 10. It's very easy to play Zenless with a marginal amount of time invested, and it also gives you pre-built trial characters throughout the entire story, so you don't even need to have characters built to play the main story. Now, we can move on to what I think is debatably the most important aspect of a gacha game: the character writing. Genshin's character writing, in my experience so far, range from pretty decent to really bad. Hey everyone, Incubus from the future here to say that I'm kinda wrong about this. I'm a little bit too harsh with this description, because now that I'm playing through Fontaine, I'm seeing a lot of really well-written characters, like Farina, Nivelette, and Navia. Even some of the earlier characters, like Kazuha and Dainsleif, are really well-written. As I said before, the writing definitely picks up in quality during Sumeru, where we see characters like Dia and Kale, but that doesn't mean that everything before Sumeru is trash. Some of them are pretty well done, built on interesting premises and executed well with good voice acting. Diona is a pretty good example of a decent character from Genshin. She's this kid who has a dad that drinks a lot and develops a hatred for alcohol because she feels it takes away from the time her dad could be spending with her instead of drinking. So she decides that she's going to ruin the country's wine industry by making the most disgusting drinks she can. Unfortunately, she's been blessed or cursed by a spirit that causes any drink she makes to be delicious. So no matter how hard she tries, she can't make a bad drink. It's a silly concept that's treated in a very lighthearted manner, and her voice acting is great, so it ends up being a fun story to experience. Some of the worst characters are much less interesting, like Lisa. Lisa's only real personality trait is being the Hoyo-mandated mommy character of Mondstadt, and all of her voice lines reflect that designation. I'm aware there's more to her than that, but I think it's not interesting enough to override the very clear intentions Hoyo had with her character. But that's just an opinion, I guess. Also, a lot of characters in Genshin commit war crimes right in front of you without batting an eye. It's really funny. Like I said, this game is unintentionally hilarious. In general though, I'd say whether or not a character in Genshin is well written is basically a coin flip. And if you're playing these games, you've got to get used to coin flips real fast. Most characters in Genshin are pretty mid at best, and even if you love any of them, chances are they aren't getting much screen time. Genshin's score here will be a 7 out of 10. There's a very wide gap between its best and worst characters, and most of the characters will fall somewhere in between. But even the characters that I would call mid aren't that bad. In the complete opposite field, we have Star Rail. Star Rail is one of the few games that can take characters that I don't find visually appealing and turn them into some of my favorite characters in the game, namely Sampo. I'd say Sampo's voice actor is doing like 90% of the heavy lifting in that regard. Just listen to him.
Me? You guys scared me to death. There I was, looking for relics to sell, when all of a sudden you came stomping over. I thought the Silvermane guards were paying me a visit.
Star Rail's characters may just be its best selling point. Aside from a certain man whose name gives away everything about his character, and a woman who relentlessly stalks you, I don't think I actively hate any character in Star Rail. The characters in this game feel like they were written by very nerdy, very gay Zoomers, and that is a compliment. Pretty much everybody has some amount of personality, and everyone has a lot to offer beyond their surface level tropes. My favorite character, Sparkle, occupies the trope of the crazy chick, but the way that she's presented and the breadcrumbs we get regarding her story suggest that there's a lot more to her than just being batshit. I interpret her as a serial shitposter who's just looking to rile people up and push their buttons, but won't go so far as to actually hurt people. And I see her as someone who revels in the misunderstanding and mischaracterization that she would hurt people. It should also be noted that Star Rail's slow burn storytelling also applies to its characters and their stories. For instance, one of our companions on the Express, March 7th, has had mostly a mystery for a backstory until just recently, so 2 years later. Sparkle and Sampo are two characters who have very little known about them, but seeing as how I'm familiar with how HSR tells its stories, I can have faith in the writers and trust that my favorites will eventually be revisited. I'm getting away from the point here. The point is that the characters in Star Rail have a lot of depth and personality to them, and even if their baseline relies on a trope, the character typically goes much deeper than that trope. Star Rail will get a 10 out of 10 here. Every single character in Star Rail goes incredibly deep, and all of them are entertaining in their own right. My list of favorite characters is pretty much just a list of the characters with the most eccentric personalities, but everyone in the game is just as well written as these ones, to the point where I have to admit that even the characters I don't like are extremely interesting characters. Zenless I'm torn on. I think the cast of Zenless is by far one of the most reliant on tropes, and out of the 3 games, this one doesn't have any extra voice lines that you can listen to when you own the character. So your experience with the character is pretty much limited to the main story and any time that they show up in an event, which, to its credit, is pretty frequent. I jokingly tell my friends that imagining everyone in Zenless as autistic makes the characters feel really endearing, especially in cases like Miyabi and Anbi, who otherwise would just be occupying the so socially inept that it's unrealistic trope. My take on Zenless's character writing would be something like this. If Genshin and Zenless made a character based on the exact same trope, I could rely on Zenless to execute it in a much more appealing manner. Even if the character doesn't have that much depth beyond the trope, they'll at least be more entertaining than if they were in Genshin. Hi, Incubus from the future again. I disagree with this now. I think the best characters from Genshin are leagues above the best characters in Zenless, whereas the worst in both games are at about the same level. I would not put Miyabi, Lycon, and Hugo above Navia, Nivelette, and Dainsleif, even if I do love them. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Back to the video. I'd also like to note that while I really do like the visual style of Zenless and the fashion aesthetics of their designs, I'm not the target audience of this. Don't get me wrong. I love women as much as anyone, but I've never been a fan of the Texas meal proportions, so to speak. If you are the target audience of bouncing anime Z-cups, all power to you, but clicking on a character and having them move like a flan cake every time detracts from my enjoyment of the game. Zenless will get a 6 out of 10 here. Their characters are fun, but I'd be lying if I said they were more interesting than the cast of an isekai anime. Next up is Characters Part 2. Alternatively titled, How Likely Is It That I'll See My Favorite Character from More Than One Patch? Genshin once again is going to come up short here. I'm sorry Genshin fans, but you already know this one is true. In Genshin Impact, characters will typically only be present for like 5 or 6 moments in the story, at best. Unless your favorite is someone who's intrinsically tied to the main plot, or someone vitally important to the main story of one of the nations, you're probably not going to see them often, if at all. I'm not kidding. Some of the character story quests, you know, the quests made for those characters, don't feature the character they were made for in any prominent manner. They may involve those characters, but some quests, like Nilu's story quest, has her playing a side role, while the main character of that questline is an NPC that we've really never met beforehand. There are a lot of characters who never make an appearance during the main story questline. After completing Inazuma's Archon quests, I realized that I hadn't seen about half of the characters that Genshin has from Inazuma, and the ones that I had seen had maybe said 5 lines of dialogue at most for the unluckier ones. Not much else needs to be said about this. If you have a character you love from Genshin, you just need to pray that they're vital to the plot. They recently revealed a lot of the characters from the upcoming story section in Nodcry, and my favorite from the trailer was Yehoda. But considering that there are tons of heavy hitters in the lore department revealed in that trailer, I'm most likely going to end up suffering with a favorite that is a 4-star, with a few lines at best. Genshin's score here will be a 4 out of 10. Content of each character does exist, but usually you have to go out of your way to experience it, and even then, it might not be exactly what you're hoping for. I've already touched on this a little bit with Star Rail, but Star Rail will bring characters back, even if it takes them a really long time. Except Seele. Considering the intergalactic scale of Star Rail's story, it's a lot easier to justify the reappearance of characters that have the money or the means to move intergalactically easily, like the Stellaron Hunters or Argenti, who canonically have their own ships. Characters like Bronya, Bailu, or Gallagher have lore reasons that would prevent them from leaving their home planets, at least for an extended period of time, making them unlikely candidates for recurrence. Either way, Star Rail seems to always find a way to bring back old characters into the spotlight, except Seele. The War Dance event saw a lot of the characters from Belobog return, except Seele, and Silverwolf manages to show up once every 2 or 3 patches one way or another. One thing I really appreciate about these recurrences is that a lot of the time the characters have dialogue that references past recurrences or side quests. Another one of my favorite characters, a mahjong addict named Qingchui, has shown up on Penacony a handful of times through side quests and events, and we get to see that she's actually made friends with other characters like Argenti and Boothill over time due to these quests, which makes the universe feel like the characters are developing over time. Star Rail will get a 7.5 out of 10 for this part. It might take a really long time to see some characters again, and in some cases, Seele, you might literally never see them again. Zenless is actually a lot like Star Rail in this section. They have frequent events, and they're always finding excuses to bring old characters back for those events. From Billy being the perfect guy to have along for a mecha fight, to Grace and Lucy showing up during the current summer event to do some machine work and vehicle modifications. Sometimes you can see characters just chilling around town too, so you can see what they're up to, and I think that's pretty fun too. There's really not much more I can add about Zenless here, it's just pretty good about bringing characters back. I'll give Zenless a 10 out of 10 here. When characters recur in Zenless, it's usually a lot of characters coming back. This summer event gave us Lucy, Grace, Miyabi, Yanagi, Trigger, Soldier 11, Vivian, Hugo, Astra Yao, Nicole, Anby, and probably a few others that I'm forgetting. Honestly, it's not exactly incorrect to say that you see every character at least once every patch or two, even if those reappearances are mostly through events. Now we can move on to some of the more important aspects for some people, the endgame. Alright, I've had to rewrite this section a couple times because the endgame experiences in all these games are very different, and as I experience more of it, my thoughts change to reflect my own experiences as a mostly free-to-play player. Genshin's endgame is an interesting one to talk about. Given my state as a relatively fresh Genshin player, I don't have enough characters or a good enough team to fully clear any of the endgame modes yet, but I'm familiar enough with each mode to be able to talk about them in their basics. I also consume a lot of Genshin content, so I'm aware of what players who have invested a lot more time than me are able to accomplish and what good meta teams look like. My teams are far from being meta. The best thing about Genshin's endgame is that after 5 years, there are so many characters to use for your teams. Unfortunately, new players won't have access to a lot of the 5-star characters for months, potentially even years until they get reruns, but all 4 stars have an equal chance to drop from the standard banner. The bad news there is that all 4 stars have an equal chance to drop from the standard banner. If you really need one or like one, they're competing against all the other 4 stars in the roster. Farming for these characters feels like Genshin has tried their absolute hardest to make it arbitrarily difficult. For starters, some of the materials you'll need to level up your character's weapons and talents are only able to be farmed on specific days of the week. I swear, every time I look at my characters and decide what I need to upgrade next, I end up in a situation where the material that I need the most is not available on the day that I check it, and as someone with ADHD, there is no way in hell I'm going to remember it when the day finally rolls around. Drop rates for the materials you need for leveling characters are also lower than they really should be, and each character needs a local specialty plant that you need to collect for their ascensions. And some characters' local specialties only spawn in clusters of like 30, and when you collect them all, you need to wait 2 days for them to respawn, or join a friend's world. A character's total required number of local specialty plants for their max ascension is 168, so for a character like Xingqiu, who needs silk flowers for his ascension, will take close to 2 weeks to finish ascending because there are only 38 silk flowers to farm every 2 days. Another thing to mention about local specialties is that they're found in the character's region of origin most of the time, which means that a newer player who wants to build a character from Natlan will have to travel all the way over here from their starting spot in Mondstadt to be able to find the materials and fight the bosses of the characters they need. Lastly, Genshin has the lowest amount of usable energy in all 3 games and has the slowest energy recharge rate out of all 3 games, meaning that the headaches that I just listed are made worse by the fact that you'll be doing less farming in Genshin than you will be in the other 2 games. To be fair to Genshin though, it has a really nice artifact rerolling system, even if it took 5 years to add it. You can select 2 of the substats on the piece that you're rerolling to guarantee 2 rolls into, so you're not completely left to the whims of RNG like you are in Star Rail's rerolls, which have repeatedly stomped on my heart. So, now that we know that farming is a headache, we can talk about the endgame modes in Genshin. First, we have Spiral Abyss, which is a mode where you take 2 teams of 4 to take on 12 floors of challenging fights. Each floor has 3 chambers, and completing the challenges, usually time trials, will earn you rewards. Only the last 4 floors reset in Spiral Abyss, so after you complete the first 8 floors, you won't be getting any new rewards from them. Spiral Abyss is a pretty simple game mode and doesn't differ much from standard Genshin gameplay, but completing floors 11 and 12 will require a lot more investment into your characters and a bit of skill. Oftentimes the Abyss will be catered towards the newest characters in the game, but you definitely don't need them to clear it, and some new characters aren't that good if you don't also have their best supports, so try not to get baited into spending for things that won't actually help your account. The next mode is Imaginarium Theater. I personally really like this one. I don't have enough characters leveled, so I can only do the easy mode right now, but having to pick and choose which characters to use is interesting to me because I love to experiment with characters and teams that I otherwise wouldn't even consider. In Imaginarium Theater, you're given a roster of characters to take through a series of battles, but you can only use each character twice before they're eliminated from the roster, making it a test of strategy and resource management. Both of these modes reset once a month, Spiral Abyss on the 16th and Imaginarium Theater on the 1st. There's also a new endgame mode called Stygian Onslaught, which is the most challenging mode and I can't even reasonably attempt it. For Stygian Onslaught, you need 3 teams, and you cater them towards the reset's 3 bosses to attempt to defeat them within the allotted time. As far as I understand, this mode is a pure DPS check on your teams, and can require some very specific types of compositions to have any reasonable chance of completion at higher difficulties. Stygian Onslaught resets on each new game version, so roughly every 6 weeks. Genshin will be getting a 2 out of 10 for farming and an 8 out of 10 for endgame modes. Building characters is quite frankly way too time consuming, but when you have those characters built, the endgame modes are very fun. For someone who's pretty casual, it's a proper challenge. Anyone who knows how to play the game can tell you that my Mawika gameplay in the footage I just showed was really bad, but even I was able to 3-star that floor. Star Rail's endgame is debatably its weakest point. Given its nature as a turn-based JRPG, most of the endgame content comes down to pure RNG. It can be a lot like solving a puzzle, where you need to find the specific order of actions to take in order to give yourself the best shot at victory. But when a character with 80% crit rate misses their crit 4 times in a row and kills your run, it can be frustrating. There's also the power creep issue, as a lot of the older characters are completely unusable in the endgame due to the outdated kits not being able to keep up with the damage requirements of new content. Here's a chart of the top characters in Star Rail right now, and here's how many of those characters were released before this year. Team building is one hell of a task in Star Rail sometimes. A lot of characters have very specific synergies and are clearly meant to be played together. Sparkle, for example, increases your team's skill point cap by 2, and her ultimate refunds 4 skill points. The rest of her kit rewards your team for using those skill points, so she's obviously better with characters who are using them as fast as she's handing them out. We just got Archer for free. Yes, that Archer from Fade. And he also increases the team's skill point cap by 2, so to a maximum of 9 with Sparkle. But his skills cost 2 skill points per use. His skill can be reused up to a maximum of 5 times per turn, increasing in damage with each use, meaning the only possible way to use Archer to his full potential is to play him with Sparkle on the team, because otherwise you will never be able to spend 10 skill points. There are a lot of examples like this, like the Herta who needs to be played with another Erudition character on the team, and Finan who's most effective with a team of 3 supports. This is my only real complaint about HSR. Your options are extremely limited, and if you don't have the right pieces to the puzzle, you can really feel it. Farming is pretty streamlined in Star Rail, thankfully. The only thing that has a limitation on it is a character's advanced trace materials, which requires you to farm from boss battles that can only be done 3 times a week, but the drop rates from those are pretty good, so you likely won't need more than those 3 fights to get the character to where you want them to be. Everything else is accessible from the same menu, and we frequently get events that double the drop rates from various farming modes. Endgame content in the current state of the game is very difficult unless you're a whale. My teams are good. They have strong builds, solid relics, good synergies for the most part, and are far from being weak characters, but they still fall short of the DPS checks and aren't able to fully clear all of the endgame content. Meanwhile, my friend with E6S1 Finan can easily full clear all of the endgame content with this Bronya supporting him. In terms of game modes, Star Rail has 3 as well. The first endgame mode is Memory of Chaos, which is pretty similar to Spiral Abyss from Genshin. You similarly create 2 teams to fight through 12 floors, but instead of 3 challenges per floor, you only have 1 fight per team. The later floors can be brutally difficult. Sometimes I'll have characters legitimately get one shot from full health, making it mandatory to take characters who can weakness break the enemy before they can use their strongest moves. The next game mode is Pure Fiction, a mode where you fight waves of enemies and AoE is king. You're never really at risk of dying in Pure Fiction, it's more so a test of how quickly your 2 teams can clear waves of enemies quickly. This is one of the least challenging endgame modes because it genuinely is just a DPS check, which means that your only strategy is to maximize your damage output. The final endgame mode is Apocalyptic Shadow, where you take 2 teams and have them defeat one of the game's bosses each, who are usually given new mechanics for the mode and require unique strategies to play around. I'm a bigger fan of this mode than the others because it feels like the path to victory is always possible, I just need to find it. These endgame modes rotate their resets every 2 weeks, so every 6 weeks, all 3 will have reset. Star Rail will get a 9 out of 10 for farming and a 3 out of 10 for endgame. While I personally really enjoy the endgame, it's a little unreasonably difficult, especially for newer or free-to-play players. When characters become unusable, I think it just becomes a problem. Zenless is a pretty unique case in terms of endgame, considering it's a newer game than the other two. I personally haven't touched most of the endgame in Zenless because I'm just not interested in it, but considering the skill ceiling is much higher than the other games, pretty much any character is capable of clearing all the content, even for casual gamers. I consider myself to be a casual in all 3 of these games. I pull for characters that I like over characters who are meta. In Star Rail, I just skip Sunday because I hate him as a character, and he and his sister Robin turned the game into easy mode, which I would find boring. Somehow in Zenless, my favorite character happens to be the easy mode character, Miyabi. That being said, whenever I do try out endgame content in Zenless, I don't really have that much trouble, and whenever I do, it's a skill issue. All that aside, farming in Zenless can be a little bit tedious. You need a lot of XP materials to get your characters fully leveled compared to the other games, or at least it feels like you do to me. I could be misremembering, but I swear I was farming EXP materials for like a week to get a character from level 50 to 60. You also only get 1 drop of the materials for characters' core passives when you fight the bosses to farm it, which drives me insane. Zenless, at the very least, otherwise has a lot less materials to farm than the other games. As for game modes, Zenless also has 3. I don't consider Hollow Zero to be endgame, which is why I also omitted Divergent Universe and Simulated Universe from Star Rail's list too. Firstly, we have Shiyu Defense, which is the Zenless equivalent to Spiral Abyss. There are 4 different nodes of Shiyu Defense, but the one that's really endgame is the critical node, where you take 2 teams through 7 different frontiers and have them defeat enemies. I'll be real, I don't even think I have this critical node unlocked yet, so I can't give you much more in-depth analysis of the mode than that. Next up is Deadly Assault, which is basically like Stygian Onslaught. You face up against 3 bosses with 3 teams, and try to get as many points as possible in the allotted time. I don't even have 2 fully built teams yet, let alone 3, so I haven't touched this mode either. These 2 game modes reset every 2 weeks. Lastly, we have the Endless Tower, which is a game mode where you battle a series of floors of enemies, with damage taken by your team persisting between floors. Obviously, bringing someone like Astra Yao will trivialize the lack of HP restoration, but this is a game mode that I actually have played, and I enjoy it. It's pretty fun to reset a floor even after beating it, just to get a better clear where I take less or no damage. As far as I've seen, this mode doesn't reset or have any real schedule for new content. Zenless will get a 5 out of 10 for farming and a question mark out of 10 for endgame. I haven't played enough of the endgame to give it a rating, and while farming takes a while, it's ultimately easy to do and has less stuff to gather than the other games. That about sums up anything I can say about the endgames of these games. Your ability to clear the endgame is mostly going to be reliant on our next section, the gacha. Yes, the most defining feature of these games, the namesake of these games. The gacha mechanic. All 3 of these games have nearly identical gacha systems, with fairly inconsequential differences between the 3. All 3 games have a base chance of 0.6% for getting a 5-star character, with Soft Pity kicking in at 75 pulls, which exponentially increases your odds of getting the 5-star until you're guaranteed one at 90 pulls. It's very rare that you'll ever hit 90 pulls. In Star Rail, I've gotten most of my 5 stars on the 81st pull, and that is considered very bad luck statistically. When you get the 5-star though, you aren't guaranteed to get the one that you want. If you're pulling on an event banner, you'll have a 50-50, where if you win, you get the character you're pulling for, and if you lose, you get one of the characters on the standard banner. Not all standard banner characters are created equal. In Genshin, losing the 50-50 is oftentimes worse than getting a 4-star character. In Star Rail and Zenless, there's pretty much a handful of decent enough options, and then one landmine character that you never want to land on. In both Zenless and Star Rail, my first 5-star was the landmine, those being Nekomata and Yunqing respectively. Luckily, after losing a 50-50, your next 5-star from an event banner is guaranteed to be the one that you're pulling for, and pity carries over across patches. So let's say you're pulling for Kafka, who's rerunning in Star Rail right now. But you lose your 50-50 and you don't have enough pulls to get her before her banner runs out. Whoever you pull for next, you're guaranteed to get, because the pity from losing the 50-50 carries over. The 4-star rate in Genshin and Star Rail is the same, at 5.1%, which usually means that you'll only get 1 or 2 per 10 pull, and you're guaranteed to get at least 1 for every 10 pull. In Zenless though, the rate is 6% for A ranks, which doesn't sound like that much of an increase, but I find myself frequently getting 3 or 4 A ranks for every 10 pull. Weapon banners also have different rates. Genshin, yet again, is the worst. They have an 0.7% drop rate for 5-star weapons, with a guarantee at 80 pulls. When you get the 5-star, you get a 75-25 roll to get one of the featured weapons on the banner, or a standard banner weapon. And then you have a 50-50 for which weapon you get if you win that 75-25, because the weapon banners in Genshin are not separated. If you don't get the weapon you wanted, you get a fate point, which guarantees your next 5-star will be the one that you want, but it expires if the banner changes, so you need to have the pulls to secure it before the banner ends if you really want a specific weapon for someone. Star Rail has an 0.8% drop rate for 5-star light cones, with a guarantee at 80 pulls, and a 75-25 to get the one that you're pulling for. If you lose the 75-25, you're guaranteed to get the next light cone you're pulling for. This pity carries over across banners. Zenless has a 1% drop rate for an S-Rank W engine, with a guarantee at 80 pulls. It also has a 75-25 and a guarantee if you lose the roll. Its pity also carries over across banners. All three games will get a 5 out of 10 for this category. It's gambling at the end of the day. Genshin's weapon banner specifically will get a 1 out of 10 though. That shit's too predatory, and I'm not even willing to pull on it at all because of it. Apparently fate points weren't always a thing either. Apparently, a streamer named Tectone, before fate points existed, spent $2,000 on Hu Tao's weapon in order to get one copy of it. Now, we have to talk about the Gacha Generosity in terms of free-to-play gamers, and what new players can expect at the beginning of their journeys. I'm sorry to keep saying this, but Genshin continues to be the worst. In terms of handouts to free-to-play players, Genshin doesn't really give you much. New players get access to 10 free standard pulls, and a beginner banner that they can get 20 total pulls on. The characters in that banner range from some of the actual best characters in the game to some less than desirable characters. This banner does not guarantee you a 5-star, but you do have a chance to get the 1.0 standard banner characters at the same rate that you normally have for 5 stars. You can get a lot of Primo Gems and event pulls through the main storyline, and there are tons of Primos available through exploration and achievements as well. There are also events that will run every now and again that usually give a pretty sizable amount of Primo Gems. Aside from that, free-to-play players are mostly going to be relying on the endgame content, which a new player, let alone a free-to-play new player, will not be able to do. Events are also a good source of income, but unlike the other games, Genshin doesn't really keep its events permanently, so you're limited to whatever events are running at the time that you're active, and there is no backlog of permanent events. Genshin will get a 3.5 out of 10 for this category. There are a lot of things that you can get Primo Gems from, but it's incredibly time-consuming, and the lack of permanent events is just upsetting. The lack of a 5-star guarantee for new players is honestly really bad too, considering the standard banner characters aren't really that valuable to begin with. Star Rail is ridiculously generous. I have 16 5-stars in HSR after playing for about 3 months, and 4 of them were given to me for free. I was given 3 5-stars upon logging in, one of them from the beginner banner, one of them from a 5-star selector, and one of them from a redeemable currency. An important disclaimer about that is that I started playing while the anniversary content was active, so 2 of those were due to the anniversary. New players who log in right now can claim a free archer, 20 standard pulls, a beginner banner that'll give you a standard banner 5-star within 50 pulls, and a beginner event that'll reward you as you level up your account. Now, I'm not technically a free-to-play player because I buy the $5 monthly daily login bonus for all 3 games, but that's the same price in total as my Spotify subscription, so mathematically speaking, it's a good deal. It's roughly 18 pulls per 30 days of logging in for only $5. $5 when buying pulls directly is usually less than 4 pulls, so I don't mind spending $5 for nearly 5 times the pulls. Star Rail has tons of Stellar Jades to be farmed from permanent events and side content, and while the event schedule isn't as busy as Zenless is, we do get at least 1 event per patch on average, with around a 10 pull in rewards a lot of the time. The bulk of Stellar Jades after the side content is completed, however, will again be the endgame content. Luckily, the earlier levels of endgame content still gives rewards and resets in Star Rail, and it isn't too hard for fresh accounts to beat that up to a certain point. Zenless is also generous. During anniversaries, it's the only game of the 3 to give you a free weapon along with the free S-rank character. New players can expect to be given 20 free standard banner pulls, a free Korin, a 10 pull in Polychrome which you can use to get limited pulls instead of standard pulls, a beginner banner that'll guarantee a standard banner 5-star within 50 pulls, and a beginner event that will give you more standard pulls as you level up your account. I'm also fully convinced that Zenless secretly has a higher S-rank rate than it claims, because I got Nekomata on my first 10 pull, and I've gotten early S-ranks 2 times since then. For comparison, I've literally never gotten a 5-star before Soft Pity in the other 2 games. Maybe Zenless just likes me more, but after going to the 80s so often in Star Rail, I'm convinced that I can't just be getting lucky in Zenless. Zenless also has a handful of permanent events to farm, and right now they're rapid firing events at us for the summer event, some of which are basically login bonuses where you don't even have to do anything to claim the rewards. While the rewards aren't technically as much as Star Rail's, the amount of events makes up for the difference. Zenless again has a lot of farmable currency in the endgame content, and HoYoZero, which I didn't include in the endgame content, which refreshes the most frequently of the three as far as I'm aware, and is currently the easiest to complete out of the three games considering how new the game is. I have heard people start talking about HP inflation though, so whether or not that'll stay the case is tough to say. Star Rail and Zenless will both get 10 out of 10s in this category. Between Star Rail handing out free characters every now and again and 10 pulls every patch, and Zenless having extremely generous new player gifts, both of them are worthy of the 10 out of 10 rating in my opinion. Another thing to note about both Star Rail and Zenless is that on their standard banners, they have a system where after you've pulled 300 times on the banner, you can select one of the characters on it to simply obtain. So maybe after 300 pulls you still don't have a character that you want from the banner, or maybe you want more copies of the same character to make them stronger. I personally really appreciate this system because my luck on the standard banner in every game is simultaneously the best and worst. I'll get 5 stars early, but they'll either be the worst ones in the game, or ones that don't even remotely fit into my teams. I really wish Genshin had this system, because I'd love to be able to guarantee myself a Tainari, since he's one of my favorite designs in the game, but unfortunately I kind of have to hope that I lose a 50-50 to him. After all is said and done, we can finally begin to answer the question. Which HoYoVerse game should you play? Well, the easy answer is whichever one you want to play. If you like a particular game's visual style, narrative style, or gameplay a lot more than the others, then just play that one. I'm not going to sit here and tell you not to play Star Rail because there's no skill expression, or not to play Genshin because the fact that Natlan's characters are as pale as I am is problematic, or anything like that. Literally just play whatever you want. If you saw Farina from Genshin and fell in love, play Genshin. If you love to read, play Star Rail. If you're the target audience of ecchi harem anime, play Zenless. Now, if you're not satisfied with that answer, or maybe you just skip to the end and want a quick and easy definitive answer, Genshin Impact is the hardest to recommend to new players. With the least friendly free-to-play systems and outdated farming methods, it's definitely the worst option for a new gacha gamer to try to get into. If you're someone who's looking for a lot of content to go through though, Genshin has 5 years of it accumulated. And if you take it at a slow pace, it can last you months while you catch up. It's also well suited for players who love open world games and exploration. This is literally what if Breath of the Wild was a gacha game. As much as I've been dunking on Genshin this whole time, it's actually my second favorite of these 3 games. It's a perfect comfort game that you can slowly work away at completing, and with so many characters in its roster, it's almost definitely going to have someone that suits your tastes in either character or playstyle. Honkai Star Rail has a very slow burn style to its storytelling, and it isn't suited to people that aren't willing to sit through hours of story without any gameplay. And it also has the biggest problem with power creep due to the nature of the game as a turn-based JRPG. Older characters just get outscaled. That being said, it's my favorite game of the 3, and it has the best writing by far in my opinion. So if you care more about a good story than anything, then Star Rail is the game for you. Zenless Zone Zero is a fast-paced, high-skill expression game with flashy combat and bouncy animation. If you want a more laid-back and comedic story, or maybe you're like me and really enjoy the combat, this is probably a good choice. It's also the newest game of the 3, so it's naturally going to have the least content to go through, meaning that you'll run out of things to do faster, but the endgame content refreshes frequently, so it shouldn't be that much of an issue. It's probably the safest option if you're still not sure by this point. The final scores for each game are: for story, Genshin gets a 6.5 out of 10, Star Rail gets a 9.5 out of 10, Zenless gets a 7 out of 10. For casual experience, Genshin gets a 3 out of 10, Star Rail gets a 6.5 out of 10, and Zenless gets a 7.5 out of 10. For character writing, Genshin gets a 7 out of 10, Star Rail gets a 10 out of 10, and Zenless gets a 6 out of 10. For character recurrence, Genshin gets a 4 out of 10, Star Rail gets a 7.5 out of 10, and Zenless gets a 10 out of 10. For farming, Genshin gets a 2 out of 10, Star Rail gets a 9 out of 10, and Zenless gets a 5 out of 10. For the endgame, Genshin gets an 8 out of 10, Star Rail gets a 3 out of 10, and Zenless gets a question mark out of 10. I haven't touched enough of the endgame. For the gacha, all of them get a 5 out of 10 because it's basically the same system every time, except for Genshin's weapon banner, which is getting a 1 out of 10 because I think it's too predatory. For generosity, Genshin gets a 3.5 out of 10, and the other 2 games are getting a 10 out of 10. I really do love all three of these games, despite some of their flaws, and I think that anyone who wants to try them out absolutely should. I've been hopelessly addicted to them for most of this year and wanted to share my thoughts and hopefully guide some other people who also have no clue what to expect from these sorts of games into one they might like the most. Thank you for watching, and if this video helped you out, be sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment telling me what you guys think is the best game for newer players. Maybe you hated every opinion I expressed throughout this video. Leave a comment for that too, it'll be funny. Thanks again, and see you next time.